Hello everybody and welcome back to Middle-earth and another video update for Wainriders, the submod for the 4th Age Total War that takes the action back into the 3rd Age. This particular update is going to focus on the Woodland Realm, one of 3 Elven factions that will appear in the mod. This, of course, is the realm of Thranduil, the Elven King, who appears in The Hobbit, and a few other spots in Tolkien's writing. Before we get into the video here, I just do want to point out that there are several elements of this that are going to be works in progress. The units are primarily what I want to show you here today, as Weba84 has done yet more fantastic work in making these guys come to life. But in terms of unit stats, that of course remains to be balanced, and you may notice on the tooltip here it references a Lieutenant Frodo, so you can safely ignore that. We're certainly going to be changing the names of these factions as things develop. So here we're pitting off against Durin's folk. We do have a little dwarf-elf rivalry happening in this custom battle, and I've got out front here a couple of probably your bread and butter as the Woodland Realm. These are Greenwood bows. They are of course primarily an archer unit, very similar to the Greenwood bows that you saw in the 4th Age Total War, but they are going to be something of a hybrid unit as well. They do have hand axes as a secondary weapon, and those are going to be fairly effective. They've got enough armor to be a credible threat even in melee, even against some of these dwarven units, and although you don't want to necessarily use them in that role, they can be effective flankers and melee fighters at a pinch. We also have some more dedicated melee troops, of course. These are the Sylvan Axes. They're charging downhill at some Dwarven Axes at the moment who are trying desperately to get away. It's not going to work, guys. You don't have the legs for it. So the Sylvan Axes are a pretty straightforward unit, just axes and shields for these guys. Decent armor, but certainly not to compare with some of your other higher tier units or even the dwarves. Despite that, they're going to do fairly well in this matchup, as they do outnumber and perhaps outclass these Dwarven Axes. I'm not sure exactly how that all shakes out when we get down to the unit stats. A more robust unit for your melee line is going to be Sindar Spears. So you can see here they've got some more substantial armor. They've got a large shield and a spear, making them a primarily defensive-oriented melee unit. They're going to be very durable in that role. And so they do fairly well in this fight, although they're going to take some substantial losses against some of these dwarven troops. But that's to be expected. Some of these guys have precursor weapons, such as throwing axes, or are effective against armor. So we'll see in the aftermath of the battle if these guys do end up taking some losses. The bodyguard unit is Sindar Nobles. So again, we should mention that there are a couple of different population types in the Woodland Realm. The majority of the people there would be Sylvan Elves, basically wood elves. But over the top of them, so to speak, you would have this Sindarin element. And these are going to be, well, that's what Thranduil was. He was one of the Sindar. His father Orofair, the king who founded the realm, was one of what were said to be several Sindarin adventurers who journeyed east over the Misty Mountains and established realms there. No doubt Lorien was another one of these, but the Woodland Realm is perhaps one of the more important ones, certainly in the north. And so these guys are armed with swords, shields, and again, good armor. They are infantry units with no spears, and so that is going to mean they're somewhat vulnerable to repeated cavalry charges, for example. Of course, facing the dwarves, we won't have to worry about that. But we do have to worry about some of these units, such as the Warhammers and the bodyguard unit, Durin's Guard, which are effective against armor. So you're going to have to defend these guys to some extent against those types of units, but they've got plenty of support here, so they're going to do fairly well. In addition, we also have some other archer units. These Greenwood Guards, although seen here with two-handed battle axes hacking merrily away, are primarily an archer unit, although I guess I should say they're more of a hybrid, if anything. While they do have bows as sort of their primary weapon, they're going to be very effective on flank charges like you're seeing here. So I had actually deployed them in the trees over there with fire at will turned off so that the dwarves would just ignore them or not see them and then get involved in a melee, at which point you charge them out into the flanks and rear, and they do a pretty decent job, as you can see here. So they're a bit more armored as well, so they're going to be In fact, I don't think they take any losses in this engagement, so they're attacking some already tired and already beaten dwarven troops, so that's how you want to use them. But even in a more stand-up melee, they can do fairly well. In addition to all that infantry, which is really going to be the meat of your faction, you do have a few cavalry options. We'll start by going over to the further away. These are some horse archers, although they seem to have used all of their ammunition at the moment. You can see them running by with just long knives as weapons, and so we're playing keep away with some dwarven units here at the moment. But these are Greenwood Scouts, and they're going to be a very fast, lightly armed horse archer type primarily. But despite the fact that they don't have swords or spears or shields or heavy armor, they're going to be fairly effective in melee, especially on a charge, especially en masse. So I'm keeping the two of them together, and we're trying to get some flanking going on between them and this other cavalry unit, which is the Sindar Riders. So this is our third Sindarin unit, and we're going to send them charging into this Durin's Guard, which is, of course, the bodyguard unit of the Dwarven faction. And we're going to get some good charges in and get some kills. Not enough to completely rout the bodyguard, so we're going to pull them out and deal the killing blow with another charge from the other direction. And so that's going to be enough to take out the enemy general there. But those Sindarin Riders, so they don't have spears, which means their charge is going to be somewhat less than it would otherwise with those swords. But they're very heavily armored and a very effective and versatile cavalry unit. So if you have a few units of these in your army, they're going to be amazingly effective. Overall, this is going to be, I think, a pretty interesting faction. There was a point at development when we weren't quite sure what to do with Thranduil's realm. Do we attach them to another elven faction, such as the Lorien elves or the elves, the high elves of the west? We ultimately decided that they seemed to be too independent, too separated from the other peoples to really justify that. So another thought was maybe we don't even have them as a faction at all. We just put rebels up there. But that didn't seem too satisfactory either. So I'm glad we went in this direction, where they are there. They occupy a relatively small portion of northern Mirkwood, and it's going to be up to you as the player to determine how and where they're going to expand. And actually, you will have quite a lot of options. To your north, of course, there are going to be the Grey Mountains, which will be home to a separate orc faction. So no doubt there's going to be some conflict there as they try to expand potentially into your territory. North and west, you will also find an appendage of Angmar. So the Witch King, of course, has most of his territory on the other side of the Misty Mountains, but we do know that he did control some territory on your side, the eastern side, especially north, right adjacent to the sources of the Anduin River. So that faction is going to seek to expand, potentially at your expense. South of them, there are going to be some new arrivals, the Northmen, known as the Eotheod. These are the people who essentially were exiled from their homes in Rovanion as the Wainriders assaulted. And so they're kind of a newcomer on the scene, and we'll have to sort of see how you're going to be interacting with them. And south, in Mirkwood itself, evil has been growing by the year. We know that Sauron is holed up in Dol Guldur, although he has not been identified as such yet. But it certainly would have been no surprise to Thranduil that there was evil creeping through the forest, lots of rebel types of orcs potentially. So we don't know exactly how that's going to shake out in the campaign just yet. But there's definitely going to be some potential for you to take back part of Mirkwood for yourself. I think here we're dealing the killing blow on these elven, dwarven units, and the battle is over here. So all said, I think things worked out fairly well. Now again, this hasn't been balanced, and the stats haven't really been tweaked yet, but in terms of where they are for a starting point, I think we're looking quite good. So we took about 155 losses here of our elves, and we're basically sitting in very favorable conditions on the top of a hill, and getting lots of flanking and cavalry charges in. But again, all of this will be potentially changed to make the experience just more balanced and enjoyable. So I hope you enjoyed that, and stay tuned for other updates to Wainriders as development continues apace. You can also check out our forums on the 4th Age Total War, which is at the totalwarcenter.net. I'll have a link to that down below. And as always, have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.